Hello, I'm Virginia Eskin. Welcome to First Ladies of Music, a new series about women composers. This program is underwritten by a generous grant from Northeastern University in Boston. In the 1800s, European women tended to stay within the box that society had created for them. This was based on their family social status and the fact that the primary role for women was to get married, be a good wife, settle down. But women composers generally composed music for that setting, in other words, the home or, at the very best, a salon. But there were exceptions. There were some women who became professional performers, composers, and they played in public, often their own music. Today we'll be looking at 4 women composers of the 1800s. They all made successful professional careers. 2 of them followed the accepted path. In other words, they wrote music in the smaller, the more sort of home-like or intimate setting, little songs, piano works, things that could be played not only by them but by amateur musicians in their circle. But the other 2 women we'll examine today broke out of that box. They wrote larger scale works, including concertos and works for orchestra. We're going to start with Clara Schumann. She really is a blockbuster lady, and the story of her life, how it intersected with Brahms, and then, of course, her incredibly gifted husband who becomes committed to the insane asylum. It's all right out of a soap opera. She's born in 1819, lives till 1896, and that's a very long life for that time. So she has to have been strong. Clara came from a well-known and powerful family. Musically, her father was very well known, Frederick Wieck, and he actually becomes the teacher of Robert, the man who will become her husband, and that's how they meet. However, the father really didn't approve of Robert. He felt that Robert was probably not a good provider. That was true. He knew that Robert was mentally fragile. That was true also. So you can't blame the father for wanting to protect his darling daughter, and Clara was a star. She was like Mozart in that regard. And in fact, Clara is responsible for the fact that we play from memory. Up until then, musicians always had pages of music in front of them. Clara was so gifted, and she must have had a formidable memory, and she didn't need the music. As of the age of 11, she's already starting to compose, and she's playing in the court, she's traveling, she's really doing it all. Clara Schumann is one of the few women composers about whom much is known and much has been written, and it speaks very well of her. History books tell us she mentored Brahms. Brahms was an incredible pillar of strength. The delightful little lullaby that Brahms wrote that everybody knows and often sings to their own little children. I sort of love the fact that Brahms wrote a piece that would put those Schumann children and make them go to sleep. And anybody who's babysat knows what I'm talking about. When she was about age 11, she started work on her own piano concerto, and she performed it in 1837. And I want to demonstrate to you how interesting that this little teenager is so innovative. She starts the concerto, there's a long kind of an overture section that sets the stage, and then the piano steps up to the plate, and it starts like this. Now, Robert's concerto, which is written many years later, maybe 10 or 12 years later, starts very similarly. Same key, A minor, same dashing, cascading octaves in the very beginning, which is really like a wake-up call to the listener. This is the true flowering of romanticism in music, and Clara plays it to the hilt. And she also does a little bit of what I had mentioned, remember, in our earlier program about Fanny using the cello in an innovative way. She does the same thing in her piano concerto. Of course, we know that Brahms he was very affected by this too. In his piano concerto, gives this huge part to the cello. So the only reason I mention all of this is that this little woman, Clara Schumann, is really very innovative and changing the form of music. It's a very powerful thing. Let's listen to the piano concerto in A minor. It's played by Angela Cheng with the Bay Area Women's Philharmonic. Joanne Falletta is conducting. just heard Clara Schumann's Piano Concerto, played by Angela Cheng with the Bay Area Women's Philharmonic. Joanne Falletta was the conductor. You're listening to First Ladies of Music. We'd love to hear from you. You can send your comments via email to ladies@wfmt.com. You're listening to the WFMT Radio Network. Now we're going to move to Teresa Carreño, and her dates are 1853 to 1917, another long life. She came from Venezuela. She emigrated to America in 1862, and she really made her career here in our country. She worshiped Louis Moreau Gottschalk, who was enjoying a big career himself at the turn of the century. He even gave her some lessons when he was in New York, because she was presented as a piano prodigy by her family just a few months after arriving. She was called a world-class artist, and she had and did it all. She was a fantastic concert pianist, a composer, she sang professionally, and she conducted. Well, here we have an example of a very beautiful woman who did and had it all, and it's sort of wonderful. Let's hear two very characteristic pieces that Teresa Carreño composed. Bear in mind that she's had European training. She's a blockbuster pianist in her own right. MacDowell dedicated his Piano Concerto No. 2 to her. I know that Amy Beach dedicated her big Piano Concerto to Carreño. Let's listen to a small piano piece, and I've chosen it because it's very charming. It's called Revue à Prague, and it's full of some of these things that we've been hearing in some of our other women. It sort of leaps and jumps around in a very charming way, though. Here is Revue à Prague by Teresa Carreño, played by Carmen Rodríguez-Peralta. just heard Revue à Prague, played by Carmen Rodríguez-Peralta. Now you're going to hear an example of Carreño's chamber music writing, and we include it because it's another good example of the fact that she couldn't just be content with writing little piano pieces. We know that Teresa Carreño was very busy playing professionally. She was out there having really a large career for the time, but she took time to write some chamber music. And we're going to hear the first movement of her string quartet in B minor, Allegro Maestoso. It's performed by the Arriaga String Quartet. You just heard the first movement of the string quartet by Teresa Carreño, played by the Ariaga String Quartet. Now we're going to go to a Norwegian woman composer, Agathe Grøndahl. She was born in 1847 and lived till 1907. She falls sort of back into the old-fashioned module of not stepping out of the box. In her biography, there's no mention of a big career. She marries once in 1875, and she really dedicates herself to a family and career of teaching. So it's a quiet life. Becker Grøndahl left behind, though, a great deal of music. It's nice in that regard. We really have a sense of her. And she wrote a lot of charming, and here again we hit on that word. Remember early on we talked about salon music? Well, nowadays we regard salon music as something that's good. It has charm and often great skill. Becker Grøndahl's pieces really exhibit that in a great way. It does not sound Norwegian in the way that Grieg does sound like the fjords or like the great countryside outside of Oslo or something like that. She is really echoing more Chopin and Mendelssohn in her music, and that would have been good for a woman in 1860, 1870. If she really wants to be taken seriously in Norway, she has to sound European and not sound folkloric. She falls into the description of a very good home pianist, since she wasn't interested in having a big career, and her music was written with that in mind. Often there's a directness of expression in her melodies, and I like that. It's very humble. It's not for show. It's just for pleasure. Here is Becker Grøndahl's Valse Caprice performed by the Vienna Bohème Ensemble. That was the Valse Caprice by Agathe Grøndahl, played by the Vienna Bohème Ensemble. We're going to end our program today with a wonderful composer, Cécile Chaminade, French, born in 1857 and lived until 1944. And as we examine her life, it starts off really with a bang. She's the child of musicians. Her mother's her first piano teacher. By 11, she's allowed to play in public. By 1880, she's age 23. She's already flexing her muscles. She's composing in large schema. She's writing orchestral music, an opera, ballet, Concertstück. So this tells us that she took herself seriously. She even goes on tour in 1890. She visits England. She comes all the way over here to America in 1908. She even played for the Sultan of Turkey. And by 1913, she's recognized and given the Légion d'honneur. That's France's highest honor. But it seems that after that, everything goes downhill somewhat. She's very prolific. She left behind 200 piano pieces, 135 songs. You're going to hear a charming movement from a trio shortly. I have to ask myself, why didn't she continue? Well, there's no record of why that was, and she died thinking that she'd been forgotten. Even though people until recently regarded her music as sounding like the salon, all of a sudden, that's not a bad thing. So let's listen to her trio in G minor. It's the third movement, the Presto Leggero, and I just love it because it's a lot of fun to play. It's very sparkly. It's performed by the Rembrandt Trio. You just heard Cécile Chaminade's third movement of her G minor trio, played by the Rembrandt Trio. Now we're going to bring perhaps the piece that she's most famous for, and she's famous for it for a good reason. It's elegant and tuneful, it's appealing, and it's played all the time. You ask any professional flutist what piece they like to program, and they will tell you the Concertino by Chaminade. It's just a delightful work. It's very hard. I think it's virtuosic for the flutist. And the orchestra also has to stay on its toes to follow. Here's Chaminade's Flute Concertino. It's written in 5 sections, and you'll hear the last 3, beginning with the flute cadenza. It'll go back to the main theme and finally to the brilliant presto closing. It's played by Susan Milan with the City of London Symphonia, conducted by Richard Hickox. just heard the Flute Concertino, the last three sections, played by Susan Milan with the City of London Symphonia, conducted by Richard Hickox. And I think you can understand why Chaminade's piece is so beloved. Well, thanks to the four women on today's program, and they set the stage for our next program. And even though Clara Schumann, Teresa Carreño, Grøndahl, and Cécile Chaminade sort of broke various ceilings or barriers, it wasn't until the end of the 1800s that women really began to step out, be allowed socially, professionally, and even politically to have a voice. They began to develop hopes, expectations for having careers of their own. And the movement for equal rights, known as the suffrage movement, that's certainly a major part of all of this. In our next program, we'll look at American women composers of the 1900s. And they are powerhouse women, all of them. Their music reflects some of the acceptance that they're enjoying. First Ladies of Music with Virginia Eskin is produced by Carolyn Pollan for 98.7 WFMT and the WFMT Radio Network. Steve Robinson is the executive producer. The engineer is Mary Mazurek. Thanks to Alice Abraham, librarian at WGBH Radio in Boston. And special thanks to Boston's Northeastern University for their generous support. I'm Virginia Eskin, inviting you to join me again next time for First Ladies of Music. This is the WFMT Radio Network.